When you're ready, we have like 18 people in the room waiting. When you're ready, I guess I should open the room. It's 10 o'clock.
Yep.
You guys all set? Anything else? Anything else going on that you need to cover?
Wow.
All right. Okay. Good luck, everyone. Here we go.
Welcome, everyone. We'll get started in just a minute. I want to make sure, it looks like we have people connecting to audio, so I just want to give it a minute. All right, so we'll get started. Welcome to Building a Culture of Data Use. You too can become a data leader. We're very excited to be working with you all today, and I intentionally say working with you all because we'll be learning from you too. My name is Michelle Lewis. I'm actually a Parent Center representative who works on the DaSy Center, and so I'm excited to share with you today, as well as my colleagues will be sharing as well. If they could introduce themselves, just say say who they are. Debbie?
Yes, sorry for the delay. I'm Debbie Shaver from the DaSy Center. Happy to be with you today.
Sherry?
Hi, everyone. I'm Sherry Franklin. I'm with the ECTA and DaSy Center. Great to be here with you as well.
Kate?
Hi, everyone. I'm Kate Grandeman with the DaSy Center.
And again, I think this presentation was put together between the four of us. And as you will see, as we walk through and work with you, we all used our different strengths coming at it through the lens of a data team, in which we all bring different strengths and different perspectives. And in the end, we're all data leaders. So it's very exciting, and we are looking forward, like I said, to hearing from you all as well. I want to go over the objectives for the session, for the outcomes. You will increase your understanding of how to be a data leader. You'll learn strategies and resources for creating a strong data culture. And we'll talk about, and you'll learn strategies for engaging stakeholders in meaningful data conversations. What's really important for me to say to you during this session is that it is interactive. Those of you who participated yesterday, I'm sure you found in the roll-alike sessions that there were different ways that you were engaged and to share information, and that will be the same today. We'll be doing breakout rooms. We'll also be asking you to put things in the chat. We really want this to be a conversation. We're going to pretend that we're in person, and I think we'll be energized from what we hear today. So let's talk about the agenda. The way we have today, this afternoon structured is that we'll do an introductory breakout activity. That'll just be quick to kind of get the blood flowing. And then we'll talk about the culture of data use, go on to data leadership, and then talking about engaging stakeholders in data conversations. And then we'll wrap up. So we have an ambitious agenda. It's ambitious yet achievable. So we know that we'll be able to get through it all and hopefully provide some resources for you. So we'll first move into the breakout activity, which is around introductions. I also want to alert you to, if you take a look at the chat, with each of the breakout sessions, there'll be a Word document in the chat that you can either download or open that'll give you the questions or the activity that's in the chat. So we're just going to go into breakout room for about 3 minutes. I want you to introduce yourself and where you're from, of course, and then talk about what does data culture and data leadership mean to you. Yesterday in the opening plenary, we talked a lot about data leadership, touched on data culture, but what does it actually mean from your own perspective? So Roxanne is going to transport us to breakout rooms and we'll do this activity. All right, it looks like we're all back. So hopefully you were able to get to know each other a little bit, whoever was in your group, and have a discussion that we can bring into the next couple of topics on data culture and data leadership. So thanks, everyone.
All right, so we're going to get started with some content. And I know this session is focused primarily on data leadership, and that's actually the theme of the whole conference this year. But we're going to, before we talk about data leadership, we're going to lay the foundation with some discussion about a culture of data use. And we'll talk as we go along about how these concepts fit together. And yeah, see how that goes. Let's see. My slides. So starting with what is culture? So not thinking about data use specifically, but thinking about culture in general. So I've had a lot of discussions about culture with people in the field of early childhood and have asked a lot of folks, what is culture? And some key terms that they have brought up related to data culture are things like shared understanding, shared motivations, behaviors, values, attitudes, beliefs. And these terms would probably be the same no matter what field you were talking to, if you just ask people about culture overall. And I think the general idea that these indicate is that culture is not a discrete thing that you have. You don't go from not having a culture of data use one day to having one the next day. And all of these terms, beliefs, behaviors, values, are things that are built and are embedded in how an organization or group of people conduct their work. And one way that I've seen this framed that I really liked is this quote. So culture is how people act when no one is looking. And although culture is embedded in agencies and organizations, it is still comprised of several more specific elements. So DaSy has defined these 7 elements based on research that has been conducted in the field around data use specific to education and some research specific to early childhood. So I'm going to walk through each of these 7 key elements of a culture of data use. The first one is commitment. So getting commitment from all key stakeholders to use data for continuous improvement. And you'll notice that I said all key stakeholders. So it is really critical here that stakeholders with diverse backgrounds, roles, and perspectives be engaged in conversations about data and really become committed to the idea of using data. Next is more at the program or agency level. So there must be a clearly articulated vision for data use within a program or agency. So this might be something that outlines the purposes for which data are used, how data are communicated, and essentially ensuring that people have a common understanding of what data use is supposed to look like in the program. The next piece is beliefs. So people in the organization must believe that data can and should be used for program improvement. So everyone should be bought into this idea and on board so they're able to prioritize data use in their work. And in the field of early childhood, there has been a shift over the last several years from using data as a hammer. So using data in a punitive way for compliance reasons only, or with a kind of like gotcha mindset where if your data doesn't look right, you're going to get in trouble in some way. So moving from that kind of mindset to using data as a flashlight. So building a culture of learning and exploring and asking questions to shed light on new information. And in some ways, I think people are getting used to the idea of data being used in this way, and it really kind of opens up a whole new world of using data for continuous improvement specifically. The fourth element is accountability. So making sure that people at multiple levels of the organization are held accountable for using data. But you also have to keep in mind that if they are going to be held accountable, that they need to have the supports in place to be able to use data effectively. Next is collaboration. So collaboration among staff must be highly valued and also actually practiced. So we'll get to this example, but you know, it really requires connections and communications across more than one person. Not having a single person who manages all your data and is like the data go-to person is not a good practice for building a culture of data use. And then the last two, so thinking about modeling. So leaders should be modeling data-driven decision-making as a key aspect of their roles and responsibilities. And this allows staff to actually see the importance of data-driven decision-making and increases the chances that they're going to be bought into that concept and see the value, see how it works, and just, you know, have a model for the way that they might do their work. And the last piece, which I think is the most important, is commitment to ongoing instructional and programmatic improvements. So we discussed that staff must see the value in using data, and they'll be using data, but they also must be open to actually making changes in policies and practices based on what they learn. So you can look at data all day, but if you don't do something about what you're seeing, you know, it's really not worth your time. So in an effective culture of data use, folks must be committed to using data and then also making decisions based around what they learn. So we're getting a little bit more tangible. We kind of went from the high level, what is culture, through some of the key elements. And then we're going to talk here about some practices for building and sustaining a culture of data use. And it starts with teaming. So data teams, this is probably something that has come up in your work, in your communications with DaSy, but it's essentially groups of people who are dedicated to using data to plan and to make decisions about programs and services. And you can imagine logically why data teams are important. So like I referenced before, if there's one person in your program who has access to the data, who knows how to use it, who knows how to make it pretty, that still doesn't make a strong data culture. So it doesn't support collaboration, it doesn't support buy-in, it doesn't support this culture of learning where everybody's supposed to be able to ask questions and dig into data and learn. And so you really need data teams to ensure that data can be widely used and shared and discussed and support decision-making. The second practice is data management. So to be able to use data, you need to know what you have available, what data you may need to collect. You need to know about the quality of the data, and also have some kind of infrastructure in place to access and disseminate findings related to data. So this piece really has to do with kind of the structural components that are in place to support data use. The next piece is data-informed inquiry. So this gets at what I mentioned before, building a culture of learning in which people can ask questions. But in a more kind of practical sense, you may consider implementing processes to support this goal of data-informed inquiry. So processes like the Plan, Do, Study Act, the PDSA cycles, those things may be leveraged to support the ongoing use of data and give people kind of a framework around how to do their work. You may also need to define how plans for analysis are made, who's responsible for implementing actions based on the analysis results. A lot of kind of process related things to consider here to make sure you're building out that culture. And the last practice is monitoring and communication. So monitoring being basically setting up structures to monitor the progress of your data use. So you may think about implementing processes that include feedback loops to track how staff are doing with their use of data, their level of comfort, the effectiveness, that kind of thing. And then in terms of communication, internally, you need to communicate to ensure that everyone is aware of the vision and the processes and the supports provided. And then to support external communication, you need to have kind of plans and procedures for how data are shared with stakeholders externally, because you need to have some kind of oversight to make sure that all data are being shared in a way that's useful and accessible and valuable to your intended audiences. So we defined data culture, but I do want to share a few reasons that it's important to establish a culture of data use. So this first one really hits on the point I've said a few times, which is that there shouldn't be a single data person who holds all the data. So a well-established data culture is one of the strongest levers for ensuring that data use sustains through turnover. So if you have something, a culture that's really embedded throughout the organization, if somebody leaves, if they win the lottery, you're still going to be able to maintain that after that person no longer works there, or if they take on a new role in the organization, that kind of thing. And then our goal overall is, of course, I think everyone on this call is to support children with disabilities and their families. And so professionals need data to make informed decisions to support positive outcomes for kids. So that's kind of a given, but another key reason why you want to establish data culture. And using this idea of culture that's really embedded, and it really makes sure that it becomes part of the field. So it's not going to be something like, oh, remember when we did data culture like 2 years ago? What was that initiative? Like that, it happens with different kinds of initiatives that we do. But data culture is not one of those things. It is something that we really need to grow and nurture, and that should be accepted in the field and considered a best practice and standard for how programs work. And then the last piece is that data can support decisions about program operations, accountability, and improvement. So we're talking about not only outcomes for children, but also program level outcomes that will improve services for children. So a little less direct, but those kind of programmatic decisions can be supported as well. All right, and the last piece on data culture, I wanted to share this list of key activities, which is from the Data Culture Toolkit that's on the DaSy website. So this really gets at, you know, we've told you what it is, why you need one, but in terms of what you're actually supposed to do, we have some recommendations for where to start. So first would be to formalize your data team and its vision and purpose. And we actually have lots of resources on the DaSy website specific to data teams. So there are some great graphics, some guidance on what those teams might look like and how they might interact. And once you have your data team, the next piece is to assess your data use culture. So within the Data Culture Toolkit, there is a self-assessment that focuses on the 4 key practices that I mentioned. So teaming, data management, data-informed inquiry, and monitoring and communication. And that self-assessment has specific indicators in each of those areas where you can, you know, take some time to reflect and see how you think your program falls in these different indicators. And then once you've assessed your data use culture, we have the recommendation to assess data quality. So ensuring that data quality is good enough that the data can be used reliably for decision making. And this relates to the next one, which is exploring and using data. So as you continue to work with and play around in your data, you will learn more about how you can improve collection processes, how you can improve data quality, what techniques you might want to use or analysis strategies, and how to communicate it. And then the last piece is prioritizing your critical questions. So you may be familiar with the critical questions about early intervention and early childhood special education that DaSy has on the website. But this is basically just saying that you may want to identify key areas of focus that you want to focus for answering and collecting data on based on program priorities, access to data, all different things. But there's a lot of resources on the website for that as well. So that was a ton of information. I'm going to pause quickly. I haven't looked in the chat, but to see if we have any questions.
It doesn't look like we do at this point.
All right, thanks, Michelle. In that case, I will pass it over to Sherry to talk about data leadership.
Thank you, Kate. Well, as Kate noted, you are right. Data leadership is the key to supporting an effective data culture. And so let's get started to talk about data leaders. And while we get started with the next slide, I want you to just take a pause because we're going to come back to this question. As I talk about data leadership and attributes and characteristics, I want you to think about yourself. Because when we define data leadership, we're not only talking about data leaders who are people in positions of authority, but that anyone can be a data leader. You may already be a data leader. You can become a data leader. And so as we talk about data leadership, I want you to just think about yourself as we talk about each of these components that I'll be sharing. And we're going to come back to that in a small breakout at the end of our conversation. So just to set the stage for this conference and this conversation, when we talk about data leadership, we're talking about those who understand and value IDEA early childhood data. We talk about those who can create a culture of using data for informed decision making, as Kate just described, and also those who have a vision to recognize the importance of linking and integrating early childhood data across systems. So you too can become a data leader. Next slide. So I like this quote because I believe that it connects the conversation that Kate just shared with us about data culture and data leadership. I'll just read these words for a moment and talk about it. Leadership nurtures and supports a culture of data use, keep that in mind, and develops structures that include resources and time to conduct ongoing data dialogue and feedback. Leadership is the foundation that supports the culture of data use and provides the infrastructure for doing so, and the knowledge and skills and capacity. So let's talk some about what that starts to look like. All right, so let's think about it another way. You can't have a data culture without leadership, right? So it begins with leadership. It begins with those who are guiding, who have the vision. And a strong data culture results when an organization believes in continuous improvement, but also puts that into practice. And so as you see leaders, they create the conditions for which you use data, including stakeholders and parents. To support how we think, consider, and speak around data, embedding this into the culture of data use. They ensure that staff have the knowledge and skills and the commitment, and they model this. And we'll talk some more about this as we talk about the characteristics of data leaders. Next slide. And so I'm just starting the conversation. These are not all the strategies for successful data culture, nor could we have enough slides to do so, but we wanted to get you all thinking about strategies and think more and help us to understand from you what are other strategies that you know of that help to create a successful data culture. So the first one, I say that leaders are constantly generating strategic questions. We might think of those as the critical questions that we just discussed that are being asked to determine the data collected, how it would be analyzed, reported, disseminated, and used. It is strategic. It is not necessarily a group coming together and says, what are we doing with the data? You start with critical questions and questions that you want to lead to answers. Leaders are also thoughtful about creating forums where data is discussed and debated often by diverse voices. Diverse stakeholder input is critical to allow different perspectives when discussing data, and we'll be discussing stakeholder input later. Data leaders are also thoughtful about organizing and assembling the data teams that Kate described. Data leaders think about what's the expertise needed, who are the members, what voices need to be heard, and valuing each individual member of the team for the perspective that they bring. Data leaders believe in distributive leadership. I never can say distributive. But what this means is that it is not necessarily about the role of team members, but their responsibilities. So it's not about giving leadership responsibilities to those who all may have a formal role, but it may be others in the organization that have knowledge and skills that are helpful to the team. Data leaders believe in growing future leaders. They facilitate staff understanding, analyzing and using data, and promote professional development. A successful data leader, a successful culture must be sustained over time. And so therefore data leaders are, again, strategic about ensuring professional development opportunities for team members. And lastly, leaders understand that resources are critical to be able to collect high quality data, and they must be thoughtful about allocating those resources. And so those resources are time and other resources that are necessary to gather and use high quality data. So be thinking about what you would add to this slide as well about successful strategies. Next. So this is the next slide where you're going to, in just a moment, have an opportunity to talk about, because you've been thinking about yourself the entire time I've been talking, right? You've been thinking about where do you fit into all of these suggestions. In just a moment, we're going to be talking about characteristics with you and wanting you to add to this list. I like yesterday's opening really started off by talking about, if you remember this conversation, that leaders lead with a vision and purpose in mind. They create buy-in. I like the comment that was made, they get people to follow. And so they keep their focus on the end result. And in our world, those are the infants and toddlers, the preschool children and their families. So they keep the end result in mind at all times as part of their vision and purpose. They're clearly able to articulate their expectations. You may see leaders who create goals and expectations, but they're reviewing them frequently. They're clear about it. People understand directions. They have targets. And so there's no doubt about what the expectations are around the use of data. Thus, data leaders are ensured to include being strategic in order to drive effective decision-making across the organization. Leaders inspire by basing decisions on data and not on intuition. Maybe a little intuition, but mainly on data, right? Leaders foster interconnections. In our work, we often think about breaking silos within our organizations. Well, I think we also need to be thinking about how do we reduce data silos. It is important that data is available across the organization in decision-making. And so fostering these types of connections are an important characteristic of data leaders. Leaders who understand their own thinking and are reminded that we all have conscious and unconscious biases are more effective. They acknowledge them. They learn what their biases, our biases as leaders are, but we also recognize how they may impact our data discussions So we're really thoughtful about them when we're engaging in these discussions. And lastly, data leadership actually is no longer about being in charge. A data leader is one who can mentor and influence their team. They serve as a role model for the use of data for planning and program improvement. Leaders set the stage. Again, you too can be a data leader. So I'll pause after this slide to see first, are there any questions in the chat or comments?
I did, Sherry, someone had asked about who would be on a data team, referencing back. So I did add some pieces to the chat that talks about different representations. So they can take a look there in terms of, you know, it's part of data leadership too, is really looking at making sure you have different people with different strengths.
Yes.
A part of that data team, both locally and at the family level, and then different members at the state level as well. And the data culture toolkit, DaSy's data culture toolkit, has whole sections on the data team. So just that's what has come in on the chat so far.
Thank you. Excellent response, Michelle, as always. All right, so if we have no questions or comments at this time, we are going to go into a small breakout for about 10 minutes. These questions, I prompted you before we started because you were thinking about yourself the whole time as I talked. And so now we want you all to respond to 2 questions while you're in breakout. The first is, do you know a good or an effective data leader? If so, what are the characteristics that make them a good leader? And then the second question is, what are the activities that you do or could do in your role to make you a good or effective data leader? Roxanne, is there anything? We're going to ask you to go into breakouts. We're going to come back. While you're in your breakouts, if you just think about at least one big maybe aha moment you had while you were having your discussions, to come back and provide that information to the larger group. And we'll go to breakouts now and then see you back in about 10 minutes.
Here we go.
All right, so we hope that went well. And we'd like to just hear in the chat feature, if you all don't mind, if you'll just enter into the chat some big aha moment you had or maybe didn't have. Maybe you have questions still, but just give us some sense of some of the conversation that happened in your group. So why not just start entering in the chat any of the thoughts that you had during small group time? Either question, either know a good leader and their characteristics or about yourself. Leaders listen. That probably should have been like number 1 on one of our characteristics, right? Accessibility of data. That's what I think Kate talked about, like data doesn't just live with the data manager. It's available across the organization. They are transparent. It's wonderful. Good problem solvers and creative. Great characteristics. Another comment. They're going a little fast for me. Critical thinkers, they're coaches and teachers, absolutely. They're building that culture change so that people are not resistant to data. Critical thinkers, collaborators. I like the comment about their data leaders are more than just crunching numbers. They're making connections to programmatic to leaders as well. That's great. And they're coaches and mentors. These are great characteristics that you all have been coming up with. Oh, I love their storytellers. Yes, they really are. They bring the data to life. Absolutely. And they're, again, beyond the numbers. getting to the end result and recognizing that this is about children and their families. But they're not yarn spinners. Who's Dawn? I like you, Dawn. Dave, rather. All right. And good communicators. So keep putting them in the chat. We do need to move on because we have some other rich information to share. But as we get started, continue to put your thoughts into the chat and we'll capture those. Thank you so much for your time. Over to you, Debbie.
Okay, thank you. As a data leader, you have a role to play in helping stakeholders engage in meaningful data conversations. So we're going to talk about how you can do that and build this culture as a data leader. So data conversations are valuable for a number of reasons. One, by making this part of your culture, you are building awareness, interest, and skills for this is the way we work, we talk about data, and it normalizes data use. Also, it helps ensure that everyone values the data that you all need to run your programs, to achieve those outcomes that you're hoping to achieve. It also helps improve data quality. As you share data and as multiple eyes take a look at data, you're better able to identify some strengths and areas where maybe your data needs some work, some improvement. So that helps with data quality. And then engaging people in discussions about data provides a concrete focus where here are the data, we're talking about straight from the data. That builds people's knowledge about the decisions that need to be made about policies, practices, and procedures. And even if they're not the decision makers, it makes people more knowledgeable about why these decisions are important and how they can contribute to them. And knowledgeable stakeholders yields engaged stakeholders. So data conversations are a great way to do this. I want to talk about a few ways to build engagement, and we've been talking about these really throughout the whole presentation. So first, you can build knowledge in data. Your own knowledge or the knowledge of stakeholders that come from diverse perspectives. So you're building some foundational skills. We've talked about the next one, to be purposeful, to be strategic, to start with what are the questions that we need answered and why and who are the best people to provide perspective and what are the best data sources for that group to discuss. So not just throwing everything out there to discuss, but being really strategic and purposeful. Next, when you're in a data conversation, you want to use visuals. Many of you, I'm sure, have gone to data visualization presentations, and we're going to talk very briefly about that, but presenting the data in ways that are really accessible and easy for people to engage with. And then having a guided process for talking about data is really beneficial, and we're actually going to launch much more detail into that, but it helps kind of level the playing field and bring people in that have different backgrounds in data and different comforts. So we will talk about that and we will have an opportunity to practice. And then finally, linking the data conversation to what's going to happen next. How are we going to use this conversation and the conclusions that we've made to further the aims of our program? Next. I want to point to one of the DaSy toolkits. So this is just to help build that knowledge base. So the toolkit is on the DaSy website, and it covers these topics. There are some general data topics: how to use data, what is data, but also some specific information for people who are not as familiar with the programs under IDEA. So it's a place where they can build their knowledge about what different reporting requirements are, how data are used. So we encourage you to go to that toolkit. There's lots there, and see if it helps you or helps people that are involved in your work. So I'm going to ask you, so get your fingers ready for the chat. What are your ideas on what is data visualization? So if you could answer, and I am sure you're going to come up with better answers than I could come up with. So when you think of data visualization, what is that? And let's see what y'all come up with in the chat. So someone's mentioned Tableau, which is a software program that helps you do good data visualization. Telling a story, a picture is worth 1,000 words. A graphic representation of data. Presenting data in a way that makes it easy. Charts, graphs, maps. Wonderful. Yep, so you said it all. Yeah, so it's really just helping people engage with the data, making it more accessible, easy to quickly understand. Next slide. You've really covered this, but the purpose of data visualization is to communicate findings in engaging and accessible ways, especially in a data conversation, like when you're in a meeting, people need to quickly grasp the data that you're talking about. If you do it well, a data visualization can help you help people see patterns and relationships maybe more easily than raw data. And as many of you have said, data visualization helps you tell a data story. I've seen just such great infographics where there's different pieces of information and together it tells a great story about what a program is trying to do or what a program is achieving. So those are all great reasons to use these techniques. Next slide. There's another toolkit, the Data Visualization Toolkit. It's a great toolkit. And embedded in the toolkit are links to other resources to help you with some techniques for good data visualization. Just a few pitfalls to avoid, and the toolkit gives you lots of tips for avoiding these. The first is not clearly articulating your message. Again, we've talked about being really intentional and strategic about what question are you trying to answer and what data do you need to answer that question. And so being clear in the data visualization about that. Want to make sure you're not throwing out too much data that makes it visually complicated and hard to jump into the data. You want to make sure you're not misrepresenting your data. So when you're creating graphs and pictures, you want to make sure that you're accurately portraying your data. There's being dull. You don't want to be dull. It doesn't have to be fancy. There's a lot of very simple techniques for just bringing some life into your data. And then finally, a pitfall, you don't want to forget about accessibility. And again, the toolkit provides a lot of tips and considerations for increasing accessibility. All right, next slide. All right, now we're going to get into the meat of this section of the presentation, which is talking about data. We're going to talk about a guided process, and here's one resource when you leave today that you could go to. This one's from IDC, the IDEA Data Center, and I helped develop this data meeting protocol. You can find it on their website, and then there's resources around the protocol. The reason a guided process is valuable is that it supports all participants in engaging in the conversation. So you have people coming from diverse perspectives, different levels of comfort with data. A guided process helps bring everybody in. It also helps a group thoroughly observe the data before jumping to conclusions. And I would say this is what commonly happens. You throw up a chart and everyone starts jumping in, and you come to conclusions before you've really analyzed the data and looked at it from different perspectives. And so this last one, a guided process, helps group examine data together. So you're leveraging the diverse perspectives that you have in seeing the data from different ways, and people are going to see different parts of the data. and you can make meaning, really rich meaning of the data together as a group in a data conversation. When you're in the conversation, these are steps that we recommend that you follow. So the first one, again, I've said this numerous times, is to be clear on the intention. What is the purpose of this data discussion we're going to have? What question are we trying to answer? Then we present the data, and you would need to provide some context. Where do the data come from? How do you read this chart or this table? And just orient people to the data. Then you discuss the data, and there are several steps that I'm going to break out in that section. So you have a great discussion of the data. Then you move to determining the next steps for the group, and maybe this group isn't going to make a decision, but linking the discussion back to what does this mean for our work? How are we going to use what we've talked about today to take action at a later time? And then finally, we recommend at the end of a data discussion to reflect on how it went, so that next time you can do it better. Next slide. There's multiple phases, but we're going to talk about 3 phases of the actual discussing the data so that you're not jumping to conclusions and really benefiting from different perspectives. The first phase is observation. And here you want people to stick to the facts and not be jumping and making inferences. So we call these low inference statements. So as a facilitator, you would be asking, what do you see? And people would be sharing factual statements or very close to factual statements about what they see. Then you could start going into what are your reactions to what you see. If people are familiar with different parts of the program, they might say that they're surprised or confused. So that's phase 1. Then phase 2 is interpreting the data. And here's where you start linking back to your question. So what do the data tell us about the question that we're trying to answer? What did the data not tell us? What limitations are in the data that we might need to address? What do these data confirm or not confirm? And then once you've thoroughly interpreted the data, moving to implications. What does this mean for our work? What decisions do we need to make? Do we need to make some course corrections? Do we need to collect more data? And why does this matter, again, to our work? What are we going to do with this data? So I'm just going to pause because I see a few comments have come in. Oh, so great. Texas has used the data meeting protocol, and it's a very helpful tool to structure a data meeting. I have facilitated meetings with that tool, and people have come away saying we've never had such a great data discussion. So it really does facilitate a rich conversation. Then Valerie says a data discussion starts with hypotheses generated by those most familiar with the operations. Yeah, so that is a great suggestion. Having hypotheses or maybe even predictions before the data were collected, and then like how do the data match our predictions? And then Idaho Part B has been using essential elements from the data meeting protocol. It's been a great guide for teams. So a couple of great plugs for that data protocol that was developed by IDC. So we're going to do a real quick practice. So next slide. So we're going to do a practice all together. It's going to be a very abbreviated, and then we're going to do breakout sessions where you'll get to practice some more. So to provide the context, we have a state that is evaluating its social emotional skills development practices in its early intervention programs. The question for this discussion is, are practitioners improving in their implementation of the practices? And the data source is a fidelity observation tool where someone is observing to determine the extent to which and the quality that the practitioners are implementing the practice. Next slide. So here's our data. So these are average scores on a fidelity assessment by program. So this lists 4 programs. The fidelity, the score is like a summary score across a multiple item assessment, and the lowest score possible is a 0 at the bottom. The highest score possible is a 5. This program set a benchmark that they were hoping that programs would get to 3.5. And then the red, blue, and green bars are just 3 different time points. So either unmute or in the chat, let's start with those low inference statements. What do you see? Just tell me something you see, something you notice from the data. If it's easier for you to unmute, that's fine.
Hello, this is Shayla from Texas Part C. My inference seems that the 4 programs in May is when they did better than the other months.
Okay.
That they improve.
All right, perfect. We have a few observations in the chat about patterns. All are trending up over time. Happy Place might need some happy help. I would say we would get to that in the next phase where we're interpreting the data, showing the most improvement. Programs reach fidelity by end of year. Okay, so we've started transitioning to the next phase, which is interpreting the data. So now think about, one person I think has interpreted that Happy Place isn't so happy when it comes to their performance on this fidelity tool. Another person has noted that Jane Center should be the model. So these are the kinds of things you would be discussing in the interpretation phase of, okay, what does it mean? We have some bright spots. We have some places where maybe they need more help. And then we would consider our overarching question about are they improving in their practices? Someone mentioned that they're going up over time, so perhaps our answer is yes. We might still have lots of questions, and so that would be part of the data discussion too. So I'm going to stop there because I want to make sure that we have time for further discussion in the breakout sessions. So I'm going to give you some context. This time, a state is evaluating a new early literacy program in their preschool setting. The question is, what are teachers' attitudes and beliefs about the program? And really behind that question is, are teachers feeling confident and capable and on board with this program? And maybe that would be combined with other data about how the program is going. And for this, we're going to be using a teacher survey. And so if you show the next slide. So we're not going to go over this because you're going to go over this in your groups, but it's results from the survey. It's 3 different districts. Next slide. All right, so here are your instructions. So first of all, Roxanne has put in the chat the breakout. You're going to need this. So at least one person in your group needs to have this handout because it's going to list some questions that the facilitator will be asking the group, and it also repeats that graph that I just showed you. So when you get into the breakout session, please have someone volunteer to be the facilitator. The facilitator is going to practice asking questions of the group. You can also assign a note taker. That's really for your own purposes, so don't let that bog you down. And have a timekeeper, and I'll tell you how much time in just a minute. Okay, ignore that next second prompt. The way you access the questions is through the chat that download the document or open the document that Roxanne put in the chat. And then you are going to discuss the data. So you are going to have about 14 minutes, 14 to 15 minutes to do this. If you have any problem, you can always have one of your group members exit the room and come back to the main session. and we can help resolve any issues. So with that, Roxanne, can you sort us into groups? Welcome back, everyone. We just have a couple minutes to report out however you feel in the chat, out loud. How did that go? What was hard? What was not hard? How'd it go?
So we kind of talked about it at the end, but it was really interesting to be looking at data when you don't have any context behind it. So it becomes a lot more clear when the questions are clear enough for interpretation, that people have enough information to understand even what is being collected.
Yes, absolutely. Yeah, I provided no context on the data.
I think that feeds into a lot of our discussion as well, which we made some observations on the actual chart and tried to contain it within, the data we had, and looking at District C in particular. But a lot of it was questions around, where are they in the training? Is this like in the middle of something? Kind of the timing of it, and the influence of the data on, is this midway through a project? Also the socioeconomic background. So most of we had a long list of questions around more questions and digging into the data.
Great, and even if I had given context, I think many of those questions would still come up. How do we put this piece of data into a larger context of other data, timing and all that, so that's great. Yeah, so more comments about it's hard with limited data and limited context. So yeah, this was an artificial exercise.
Our group was interested too in really pursuing the idea that behavior is the real goal ultimately, and so we'd like to know more about what the current level of behavior is, what the goal is, and how all of that really relates to beliefs. The implicit theory clearly is they are related, but we don't know exactly how and whether these data should or would help us fix whatever underlying behavioral problems there might be.
Mm-hmm. Yep. Any other comments, questions?
So breakout group 3, we had folks with technical difficulties, so it was a conversation basically, but we mentioned a lot of the items that were just discussed, but we also talked about, this was also discussed, I believe, that good data really asks more questions than it answers. Yeah. And so this can be, but I think it's important to realize too that when we're talking to stakeholders, now I know this is for more than just stakeholders, but this is a great example of stakeholders seeing one piece of data. And you have to be able to go through these steps and explain what else would be required to really make sense of this, and what else would you want to find out to pair with these data. And I think the implications, the question, the second, I got it up here, I'm sorry, what should we consider the actions are, what other data do we get next? Yeah. Either locate it or create it, like collect it. So yeah, this is a good process, very good process.
All right, well, thank you for those comments. Great observations. I have one last thing before we wrap up. I just wanted to make a comment about data teams. So these data discussions can happen anywhere. You don't have to have a group that's called a data team. Any of your meetings, your committees, they can function as a data team to discuss data. And as you build a culture of data use, these kinds of discussions get embedded in really everything you do. So with that, I want to turn to Michelle, who's going to wrap us up.
Great. Well, thanks everyone. There was great discussion happening in the chat, and hopefully in your breakout rooms as well, based on the report out. It sounds like there were. So thank you again for that piece of it. In terms of the resources, we've highlighted some resources to support your work that have been referenced throughout. So you'll be able to find these in the PowerPoint presentation. Also know that DaSy is here to support your work. When it comes to anything that you need, DaSy can help you. On this slide, it references your state technical assistance liaison. Know you can reach out to us, whether it's setting up a data team or data leadership or how to examine your data. We really are happy to help. Also, please don't forget to complete the session evaluation. When you're in the app or on the website, if you scroll down all the way to the bottom of our session, there's the survey for you to complete. We value that feedback. We're also running the session tomorrow. Unfortunately, we probably won't get the feedback before then, but we really will take that to heart as we're designing other sessions. So thank you so much.
There's a question about where to get the PowerPoint. So I know it'll eventually be on the DaSy website. Roxanne, do you know? By eventually, I don't mean a long time.
Yeah, our goal is to have everything, I think, published within 30 days. So if not sooner. So I think it will be on the DaSy website.
Thank you.
Thank you.
I know that this would have been better in person, but you guys did a great job today getting us to interact and providing rich content for the time period that we had. So I just wanted to offer that feedback.
Great. Thank you so much. We appreciate
Absolutely.
it. And thanks for participating with us. I know we've been navigating a virtual world for a while, but it's still, especially large conferences. Again, we appreciate you engaging with us.
Absolutely. Thanks for your time.
All right. Thank you, everyone. Enjoy the rest of the conference.